Welcome to Student of the Game podcast, where we help you master the fundamentals, fall in love with practice, and win at the game of life. I'm your host, Brad Noll. Welcome to the classroom. Welcome back to another episode of Student of the Game. I'm with my buddy, David Sidoni. How you doing, David?
I'm fantastic. Thank you.
So first of all, quick story about David. He's from Orange County, California. So shout out to my West Coast listeners here. Before we hit record, I told David, I said, unfortunately, I'm kind of boring. I don't watch a lot of TV or I don't watch a lot of movies. David's a former Hollywood star. I mean, he's been in TVs and in movies and had some lines here or there, but he does have a Ted Lasso shirt on. I am a big fan of Ted Lasso. So as people know, I like to coach small business owners. I like to coach my team. I'm a coach at heart. I grew up as a coach's kid. And Ted Lasso was awesome. So, Dave, why don't you introduce yourself a little bit, and I can expand on that. But I'm excited to have you on the show today because this is the first time we've had somebody that we're talking about small business here on this podcast. And you're somebody who's been in the industry. You've had some careers. You've been a realtor. You've had a great successful business, and then you pivoted and went into podcasting. And now you're creating a business off of podcasting. And I think a lot of times the listeners kind of get stuck. Like they get stuck in the day to day and they don't understand maybe there's other revenue models out there. So why don't you introduce yourself a little bit to the listeners? Thanks for being on here. And it's How to Buy a Home podcast, and something that is in my daily updates. So I've been listening. I'm a fan. Thanks for joining us here on the podcast.
Well, I got to start off by saying no shocker that a guy who maybe doesn't watch a ton of TV and movies, if anything, that Coach Brad likes Ted Lasso. I mean, come on. I imagine you got texts from everybody you know telling you needed to watch it because just like he's quotable, I've been listening to your podcast for a while now, and you're the mantra master. So I think you and Ted are both quotable. For me, I started my career very strangely. I was going to be a Division I soccer player, and then my senior year at high school, the High School of the Arts came to my campus, and that was one of my real passions. So I ended up studying musical theater for a year and giving up my scholarship opportunity, much to the chagrin of my father. And then I had 10 years in show business, got ready to settle down and moved back down here to Orange County and got into real estate. And I enjoyed real estate for about a dozen years or so. And then I got to a point where I started to figure out that I wanted to do something different because I saw what I believe was a disservice to first-time homebuyers. So I tried to figure out, at the time I thought maybe I was going to be a YouTube star. And I started studying like crazy, listening to entrepreneurs, business people who had found different ways to do the business of their business. A lot of that, some of the people that were big into social media, some of the people that podcasting was starting and starting to grow back in 2018 when I was doing my research. And so I did the podcast as kind of an aside because I was doing everything, all the pieces of social media. And then the podcast blew up. And suddenly I woke up one day and said, this is going to be my third act. It's kind of a culmination of everything that I've done in my life. And it was an opportunity. So then I had to, there's a podcast I listened to from the Gary Vaynerchuk people, Build While Flying. That's what I had to do. I had to build the plane while I was flying and figure out how to best use my talents to turn this into something that could fulfill my passion, which was helping these people, but at the same time become a viable business with all the systems and everything in place that I knew could help it fly.
Well, I mean, you first of all, you said, in my words, you'd call it pivot, but you said build while flying, right? So,
Yeah.
So one of the things that we both breezed over a little bit is you worked at Disney.
Yep.
I've got here in my notes that you've appeared in a Disney movie, hosted several TV shows on E,
Yep.
MTV,
Yep.
Nickelodeon, the Disney Channel. And then I was listening to Rob's podcast, and you talked a little bit about the junior version of the Pat Sajak. Tell us a little bit about little Wheel of Fortune there.
Yeah, it was actually really interesting. The FCC came down with a mandate to all the major networks. This is pre-streaming in the 90s, where they had to have educational programming on Saturday morning. They didn't want it just to be cartoons. And the spelling in Wheel of Fortune counts as education. So
That's fantastic.
CBS did a junior version of Wheel of Fortune. I was Pat Sajak. My Vanna White was a motion capture cartoon. So she was like behind the word wall in with all the ping pong balls all over her, and it was a cartoon that I looked at all day long. And I was a television host for 4 or 5 years and had a great run. And then one day, I was just talking with my agent and realized like you're either Mario Lopez or Ryan Seacrest or you're hustling every day of your life. And that was when I made the pivot into real estate. And because I had worked at Disneyland in high school and college, it was just coincidence that later on in my showbiz career, I did a Disney movie and I worked on Disney Channel. But um, I built a lot of my business through my relationships and through my connections to the people at Disneyland who are good, kind, wonderful people. Got a nice, steady job. And when you put in a loan application, that Disney is something that everybody recognizes. And so I helped them turn into first time home buyers. And then the rest is history.
That's awesome. So one of the things that like the name of this podcast is Student of the Game. And a lot of people think like, oh, Brad played basketball. This is a sports podcast. We're going to talk about sports a little bit. Like the goal is really not to talk about sports, but what the goal is to say there are clues in your past. There are clues in other people's past. And if you stay curious and if you pay attention to what's happening around you, you can use that. I have to imagine. Okay. And so again, I'm gonna go to sports for a second.
Yeah.
So Kobe, his nickname was the Black Mamba. These successful athletes had this alter ego, this character that they were playing. They had to get into a character in order to perform on the athletic field or the court or the course or whatever that is. I have to imagine that understanding how Hollywood works and understanding playing a character has that helped you in like now we're talking about your real estate career. Did that help you in your real estate career knowing that you were kind of playing this character?
Yeah. And it's shocking because it's in ways that most people don't think about. Um, when it comes to my Hollywood career, I was what I would call like an offensive lineman, maybe more like a random, utility fullback or a slot receiver. I was not the superstar. I got to where I got to because of everyone knew they could count on me. Hard work, gonna be there, and like on a scale of 1 to 10 in Hollywood, if 10 is, the best singer or the best dancer or the best, I was an 8 or 9, but I was an 8 or 9 at everything. And so that kept me working. And because I had that mentality on set, I kind of love to watch how everything worked. A lot of actors do their job and go to their trailer and they're just about them. By watching everything that happened, when I got into real estate, everyone said, you're going to be awesome because you're an actor and you know how to talk to people. I immediately found out it was less about being an actor and it was much more about being the stage manager on a show
That's
or
so
the
true.
assistant director because you're putting out fires all day long and keeping the ball and keeping the train going down the tracks.
If
And
you want to get into first of all, if you want to get into real estate right now, I mean, you're definitely not the actor or the front person, right? You're the guide, you're the Sherpa,
yeah,
you're the stage manager. I love that you said that. So if you're gonna if you want to start a business right now because you want to be the man or the woman or whatever, the reality is you're not going to go very far. What I just heard in this short period of time we're talking is the more people you impact, the further you're going to get, and you can't impact a lot of people when you want to be the hero. Like you just can't.
correct. 100%. And understanding that there are heroes in movies, but there are other heroes. For every Luke Skywalker, there's a Yoda. For every Harry Potter, there is a Dumbledore. And as a business leader, you have to realize your customer is Luke and Harry. You're Yoda. You're Dumbledore. And with your team, it's the same thing. You want to make your team shine. You want to make your quarterback, you want to make your point guard look incredible and let them get all the glory. You just sit back and coach and show them how to do it.
It's so good. I've got kids that play sports, and one of the things that I tell them all the time is like, in order for you to be the one, right, the person, the man, the woman on the field, you have to help other people exist. You have to help other people hit their goals. If I can help somebody else hit their goals, the ripple effects of that, I'm getting whatever I need if I can go help a lot of people win. And that's actually my life motto is help other people win, help others win. People ask me all the time, how did you build the business? How did you do this? How did you do that? I say, well, you might be looking at it the wrong way. It's not about how, it's about helping others win. It's the acronym that we created, help others win. And that's really how you become successful. So now you have all this background in acting and show business and Hollywood, call it whatever you want. You worked at Disney, you understand service, you understand, how can somebody wait in line for 3 hours and still have a smile on their face? Like, that's
Yeah.
customer service, that's taking care of people. You get into real estate and you have this experience of, you just feel like there's a miss in the real estate industry. Before we get into How to Buy a Home podcast, you were a realtor, a successful realtor, building the team, having buyers agents, having people working
Yep.
for you. And there was this stirring, if you want. Rob calls it, you were chiseled. But
Yeah.
but talk about what happened in your real estate career that kind of gave you this transition to be a podcaster and to really fight for these first time home buyers.
It's I'd love to say that I had it all figured out when it originally became an idea, but as most ideas, it birthed from, my own internal feelings. And those internal feelings were, it was my wife looking at me one day when I was building a team. And I thought building a team was going to be like just doing the inspirational, motivational, educational part of coaching. I didn't realize that when you're building a team, that there's a lot of business aspects to it. And that's not necessarily my favorite part of the job. I almost kind of I realized later, oh, I'm not a team manager of a large business. Um, I'm more the face of the company or the education and training only. And so I was getting a little burnt out and frustrated, but it was a good business realization for myself to understand what my best role was. And my wife looked at me and said, "You're only happy when you work with the Disney people." And so I thought, okay, well, what if I just get, dissolve this whole team and start fresh, and I make a new team that has a division that focuses on the thing that makes me happy. And then I thought, okay, well, how do I grow that division? And then that's when I started researching and looking into social media and YouTube and eventually podcasting as a way to reach more than I could just through the relationship of my database, but actually reach other first time homebuyers who were feeling the frustration that I felt. And then as it progressed, as a business owner, I'm sitting back and I'm realizing this isn't a Southern California frustration. This is a national frustration. So then I started studying the industry. And as I studied the industry, I saw a giant hole. And then that's when I heard every coach I've ever had in my life, whether it was, in soccer or a director or now my business coaches I've had for 18 years, saying, go for it, make a difference. And so that's when I decided to try to speak to as many of these people that were being relatively ignored by an entire industry. And when you're customer centric like that, when you're explaining, there's a new thing that's going on right now with the customers. They've had a phone in their pocket. A lot of people don't realize, like 36, and I think it's 36 or 37 years old. They've had Yelp since they were 16. So they've been looking at customer reviews far differently than someone my age, and their concept of what they hear from each other changes their perception of businesses. So I wanted to reach out to them and let them know this is just for you because I see that the industry is missing it.
That's so good. I've actually, my wife and I talk about this a lot. Is we want to create a business where, she used to be a nurse in her former life, and so she was a big fan of Grey's Anatomy for a long time. And
Yeah.
I think, what is it, Seattle Methodist or whatever the hospital was,
Yeah.
they coined themselves as a teaching hospital. And
Yes.
again, because I wanted to date my wife, I sat and watched Grey's Anatomy. Shout out, I guess, to the early 2000s, but they were a teaching hospital. And the thing I told Lindsay a long time ago is, like, I want to be a teaching real estate office. And if I have a group of interns that I can mold and kind of like figure out, I get to understand how the next wave of consumers is going to think. And I think it's really important in our business because, I don't want to go off in the deep end yet because we've got a framework to follow here, but I think it's really important to understand what are your consumers thinking? A lot of times, I'll brag and say I've got 21 years of experience. Well, that actually can be a detriment too. If I have 21 years of experience and I think about how things used to be, that's not going to keep me in business. That's just like, you say hindsight's 2020 for a reason. That's just telling my story. That's telling you how I've built my business. But I've got to continue to grow. I've got to continue to evolve. And by having an intern program, it helps us to think about. You made the comment like these kids buying homes today. Everything they do is on their phone. So you're in real estate. You have this idea to get your voice out there because you're passionate about first time home buyers. I've heard the phrase that fame is the most efficient business model. Now, I think you have to be a really confident person to understand, or maybe self aware is better than confident. You have to be a really self aware person to understand that concept of fame is the most efficient business model. I don't do what I'm doing to get famous. But what I understand is if I can leverage technology, if I can leverage a platform like a podcast and my voice is heard by more people, I can impact more people. I can inspire more people. And I feel like that's what you're doing, with How to Buy a Home podcast.
I believe that a lot of good business people, you get to that point when you have that position to expand your audience because you've done it one-on-one, whether it's at the kitchen table or at a consultation or in your office. You've done this numerous times. The new world that we're living in just opened up the idea that, I can do that same one-on-one education where it's 100% caring for that person and that individual on a broader scale, and more people can see it. And that's why one of the huge pieces of the podcast has been listener interviews. And I get more response from other people hearing other people talk about the process. And it's made that platform and that megaphone so much bigger that now I'm able not just to help people here in Southern California, but people all over North America.
One of the reasons, and I love that because I think, I'm not familiar exactly with where exactly we met, but I know we shared a table at Nashville and we broke
Yes.
bread together and we had a great conversation. And I just knew iron sharpens iron, and we were very similar in kind of our thinking. One of the reasons I built a team was because I got a slow start in real estate. When I got started in real estate, it was very transactional. It was for sale by owners. It was expireds. It was cold calling. It was door knocking. It was all the traditional methods of being transactional. And one of the reasons I built a team is so that I can help them have success faster than what I did through a relational business model. But when we talk about, helping people who are coming behind us, I think that's what you're doing right now. I want to talk a little bit about the fundamentals. So you kind of pivoted. You were like, hey, I'm this realtor. I've got this business. This is great. It's kind of stressful. I've built this big team. That's awesome. However, maybe we're missing the mark a little bit. Maybe we're not talking to the people that I want to be talking to every single day that you really can invest in. So when it comes to, let's just talk about podcasting, because I really want to talk about How to Buy a Home podcast. I've actually shared this with my team. I'm like, you need to listen to this guy. He knows what he's talking about. You're going to be a better realtor if you listen to this podcast. This isn't just for buyers out there. If you're a realtor listening to this, you better be listening to David's podcast, because that's what the buyers in this market are hearing. He's the voice of first time buyers. He's actually the voice of buyers. Matter of fact, if I have a seller, I'm going to send them your podcast because the sellers need to know what the buyers are equipped with. But before we get into all that, talk a little bit about what are the fundamentals to building a podcast?
Well, it's funny that, I appreciate that. And I do, for me, once I started building the podcast, I thought initially, okay, I'm going to take everything that I've learned at the time, 13 years in, and just put it on a podcast. And I thought that was enough. But then I thought back to the very first thing I learned when I was 35 years old when I pivoted from show business into real estate. And I got super lucky and I went to Brian Tracy, motivational business, not even motivational speaker. He's a business speaker. And I bought the entire 6 CD set, and hundreds of dollars. The number one thing I remember is he said, if you're in an industry, get up and read 30 minutes every morning. Just having the information at the tip of your tongue, on the top of your brain, it just puts you ahead of the competition. The rest of the skills and all that stuff, yes, you need to learn that, but you have to start with the fundamentals of know your business, know your craft. Have you ever talked to someone that's crazy passionate about a hobby? Well, if they were a business owner, then they'd be the best person to talk to about oil painting or, model car design or whatever it was. And then, thank goodness, I was books on tape back in the day. We live in a world where I've gotten probably 2 or 3 different PhDs over the last 6 years through podcasts and through Audible books. Constantly, every time I walk the dog, every time I wake up in the morning, every time I, have lunch, I've got a podcast or an audiobook going in my ears to learn and educate myself. The books are the fundamentals, listening to the classics on how to run a business, but the podcast is the current day-to-day information on what's going on in the industry. So that's one of my big fundamentals.
So
And then,
read or education. I mean, I
yeah,
hear what you're saying. Like my very first car had a cassette, but I remember when
yep,
after I was given a car, my first car I had to purchase. I remember I one of my things now, right? I just bought a car for my daughter. We can get into that later, but one of the things that I had to have was a CD player because my parents gave me like Mark Victor Hansen's like
yeah,
selling tips, and I had all these CDs from our mentor Brian Buffini, and it's like I have to have a car that has a CD player because this is mobile university, right? It's mobile
absolutely.
university. And so you're saying one of the fundamentals is education, whether you're getting that through reading, cassettes, CDs, podcasts. The fundamental, the strategies and tactics always change. We talk about that all the time, but the fundamentals never change. And it's putting more inside of yourself. It's understanding that I have to be a reader if I want to be a leader. I have to be a learner if I want to be a leader. And I love that. What else? Are there any other fundamentals of building a podcast?
I think it's falling in love with the same things I learned as an athlete and as a performer. It's finding the different ways to fall in love with practice.
Gosh,
Um,
took the words out of my mouth. I love this.
yeah, you have to. I mean, there's understanding and enjoying the practice and realizing how little time I'm behind the mic.
Like go. I want to before we hit record. You talked about Joe Montana. I've never heard this
Yeah,
before, but I resonated with a lot. Tell the listeners right now about Joe Montana and the Super Bowls. And like,
yeah,
first of all, he went to Notre Dame, which is in our backyard over here. But
yep,
talk about Joe Montana falling in love with practice and the mathematical equation you have here with playing versus practicing.
yeah. I had to go back and look it up because I heard it years ago somewhere where he was talking to kids doing one of his camps and talking about understanding and believing in the fundamentals and working on those drills and working on the practice. The kids were like, dude, you won 4 Super Bowls, like, of course, this comes easy for you. And he's like, okay, a game's a little over 3 hours. They've done the research on it. The playing time is only 11 minutes of a football game. So that's 5.5 of the offense, 5.5 of the defense. That means he's won 4 Super Bowls, but he was on the field for 22 minutes, period,
That's
for 4
unbelievable.
Super Bowls. And
Super Bowl MVP, NFL MVP,
yeah,
Hall of Famer, and the amount of time he's actually playing the game is so little. If you think about that, I had a listing appointment today. All right, so we still go on buyer calls and listing appointments, and I've got a great team that helps me with the transactions. And this seller came into our office today for an hour, and I prepared for 2 hours this morning, an hour and a half yesterday, and then last week I had massive preparation for this appointment. And the appointment itself was only an hour, and the amount of talking that I did, the amount of preparation that came out of my mouth was probably maybe 15 minutes. It's exactly what you're saying. And there's so many small businesses that can relate to this. Is like you're not in front of the client, but how many times do we get in front of the client or the customer or whatever, or even in your case, the listener, and this is what they see, right? But falling in love with practice, I love that you say that because that's actually our second point is falling in love with practice. What do you have to do as a podcaster to fall in love? Because so many people, are like, Brad, oh, you just get in the mic and that's awesome, and you've had almost 50 episodes, and how
yeah.
many thousand downloads, and here you are, and you're actually a really big deal that our listeners are finding out about right now. But what does falling in love with practice look like for you when it comes to podcasting?
It's really funny. It comes back to one of the things that you were talking about earlier. Because you are a solo voice in a room, a lot of the show business stuff was very helpful for me. Understanding script writing, storytelling, and understanding that, like, when you're on a movie set and you get your script, uh, there's jokes about it. It's rainbow colored because every time they rewrite it, they send the pages in a new color. And it gets out of control where they have to make up colors. There's like, we always joked about the goldenrod and the fuchsia pages because they ran out of red, blue, orange. And so understanding that drafting and redrafting, although you and I have, I think you sold yourself short. Those hours that you put in, the 4 or 5 hours of preparation for that single listing appointment, and then the only 15 minutes of talking, let's not forget about the years of time with you doing the fundamentals to understand the process. When was the first time you took a class on how to sell a home? That day, those fundamentals you did that day, you brought to that meeting. And so I have to remember that when I write something out, even though I'm, expert, guru, whatever you want to call it, doesn't mean it's perfect. So taking the time to step back, always walking away, going back and looking at points. And then what you were talking about earlier, listening to the consumer. 100%. You have to listen. I mean, people used to spend thousands, tens, hundreds of thousands of dollars on customer surveys. We live in a wonderful world right now where you can figure out exactly what your consumer wants by reading the comments. When you put information out there, if it's received warmly, understanding to filter through the trolls, they're always going to be there. But the positive things that you get, everything I do is based on what the listeners are asking for. And that took a while for me to evolve. I said I was customer centric. I said I was consumer centric. But I also thought, well, I have all the experience. Let me tell you how to do this, because basically you're in an industry where you're getting hosed. So let me help you. Let me help you. Let me help you. And then suddenly I went, the best teachers listen. So let me hear what you are struggling with, not what I see you're going to struggle with.
Time out. Student of the Game is brought to you by Noll Team Real Estate. Our mission is to eradicate mediocre real estate transactions. On your largest financial purchase, you shouldn't have to deal with average. We do this by helping you save time, reduce your stress, and helping you keep as much money in your pocket as we can. You can help us out by introducing us to your friends or family who want to make confident real estate decisions, whether buying, selling, building, or investing. At Noll Team Real Estate, we are connected to a group of realtors who sell 1 in every 8 homes in North America. If you know someone moving out of your area, there's a great chance we can connect them to somebody we know, like, and trust. Remember, relationships win. Now back to the show. This is great. This just came to me as you were talking. I have a question. This was not pre-prepared, so forgive me. But what motivates you more? Is it proving the trolls wrong, or is it adding some value to the people who want to listen?
There's a couple great people I listen to who have been big in social media when the rest of the world was like, "What are you doing?" And I just respond like, "Oh, sorry, man. Hey, hear what you're saying. Good luck to you." Anyone who has the time to be a troll, God bless them. Boy, their life is not worth me assuming that their opinion is something that's going to change all the people that I affect.
Yeah.
So,
I think there's this whole generation out there of like, you got to prove the haters wrong. And I'm glad for your answer, because again, I agree with that. And it's like, if I woke up every day just to prove the haters wrong, like that's going to get old. Like I get up every day to help others win. I just want to help others win. And there's going to be people who don't understand that. And I tell my kids all the time, David, it's like preparation creates separation. If you want to separate yourself, don't hang out with the haters. Like just prepare, understand, who you're serving. Maybe it's a teammate if you're a high school athlete or a college athlete. Maybe it's your staff if you're a leader. If you're a salesperson, it's your clients. Just understand that preparation really does create separation. Not focusing on the haters, but I do like to see those funny videos every once in a while where what's it bad memes or something where the actors are reading like all of the hate mail that they're getting. The junk mail. That's pretty funny. When we talk about fall in love with practice, you talked about making it a game within a game. What do you mean by that?
Well, I've listened to a lot of different people, everything from John Wooden's Pyramid of Success, or listen to Bill Walton talk about it over and over and over and over again. But it's understanding that those moments in practice where everyone wants to do the scrimmage, but you want to do the drill and you want to see if you can do it better than you did last time. And I've heard people talk about constantly trying to improve, and I think a lot of people think improvement means you've got this at this level, you've got this at a 9, this at a 9, this is a 9, but this part of your game's a little weak, so you should be trying to improve. I agree with that, but I also think that you can improve on the areas that you're already doing well. Lean into your strengths and finding a game within a game. For me, I'm mesmerized watching Steph Curry warm up, and the guy's got sick handles, and
Great
he still
example.
is out of control with his Harlem Globetrotter style warm up routine. And I have my kids watch it, and that's a guy who understands that this part of his game is incredibly elevated, but he challenges himself every single pregame to get even better. And if I'm going to emulate someone, I'm going to watch my boy, especially
Uh,
because he's a short dude who played basketball
who was overlooked for a long time,
a long time.
and he actually says, had he gone to a bigger school, he wouldn't be Steph Curry, who Steph Curry is today. So
No, and it was
he's got
that
a
run. It was a run in the
great story.
NCAAs. He would have been
Davidson.
drafted even lower if his team
Yeah,
didn't make that run.
absolutely. Um, okay, here's what I want you to do. We're going to pivot just a little bit on this podcast because my listeners need to understand who you actually are. So you've heard your backstory. We've heard a little bit about how you pivoted from being a realtor to understanding you went to becoming a podcaster because you wanted to niche down and you had this passion. And so falling in love with practice is a fundamental of yours, but it's something we talk about regularly on the pod because it's something that I tell my kids like all the time. Like, I don't care what you do, be an actor, be a baker, be a basketball player. You can't be great if you don't love to practice. If you don't love the process, if you don't love to show up your blood, sweat, and tears when nobody's watching, you can't be great at it. I'm sorry, like, challenge me, you just can't be great at it. Back to one of the things you were talking about, I think it was a Marcus Buckingham book called Go Put Your Strengths to Work. David and I were in the same audience back in the early
Yep.
2000s, and we didn't know each other back then, but we
Yeah.
heard the same thing and we were kind of riffing offline. And Marcus Buckingham shared a story, if you remember this, about Tiger Woods. And at the
Yeah.
time, Tiger was like number one in driving accuracy, number one in distance, number one in greens and regulation. And he was something like 104th in sand saves. And Mr. Buckingham kind of made the point, like, they asked Tiger, well, don't you want to improve your sand saves? And he said, no. And he was like emphatic. He was like, no, I'm going to improve the times I'm never going to be in the bunker. I'm
Yes.
going to improve
Yep.
my strengths. I'm going to be in the fairway more often. I'm going to be on the green more often. And I'm not going to focus on the thing that I'm not that great at. And so if you're listening right now and you kind of have all these things going on in your business and you're trying to figure out, okay, I've got this bakery and I'm baking pies and I'm baking muffins and I'm baking rolls, but I do catering and I do this and that, but I'm a little weak in this area, let it go. If I'm a little weak in transactional real estate, but I'm an amazing podcaster, go do more podcasting. Bring in more leads. Bring in more. Teach the community how to fish. Um,
Yeah.
but falling in love with practice, David. I want you to tell the listeners a little bit about how to buy a home podcast. I'm a huge fan, by the way. How to buy a home podcast is not just for first time buyers, but I know that's your niche.
Yeah.
Talk about where you started with that podcast and where you are at today. Um, I- you're going to hear a lot of bits and pieces right now. You as a listener, you're going to hear about how he's fallen in love with practice, but be really specific. Where's how to buy a home? Where did how to buy a home start, and where is it at today?
It started as it was a direct pivot. And so for a lot of business owners, just, I think you can look at it from a marketing standpoint. If you're a business owner and you're trying to understand how this podcast worked for me, it was one of several different marketing pieces that I was trying out. It was Facebook, it was Instagram, it was YouTube. Eventually, it was even TikTok, but I started a little late on that. And there was a big push for audio at one point. And so what I did for my business was I wanted the message to get heard by as many people as possible. And I thought that I was going to be a YouTube star. I mean, I was a television host. It seemed like that was going to be it. But because I didn't know the fundamentals of YouTube and I didn't understand what it took, what I did was I fell into a smaller fish in a bigger fish in a much smaller pond with the podcast. And I listened and I understood that there was the average age of the first time home buyer is 36 years old in America right now. And I do not think that's because down payments are too expensive and houses are too unaffordable, because in the average market where it's a $400,000 average first time home, the average 2-bedroom is $2,000. And it doesn't take that much understanding. How many 28, 29, 30-year olds do you know who have their stuff together and figured out what they're doing in their life? The problem is between 30 and 36, they go online and they're not getting clear and concise information. Well, I discovered when I was doing all these things that podcast listeners are analytical, intense researchers. And don't let the goofy persona fool you. Like I said, I can talk NFL and musical theater equally passionately. So understanding how to take the goofiness of who I am and my persona and my character mixed with all the business pieces, I didn't realize that the podcast listener soaks that up. And so I listened and I learned and realized, at the beginning, as I started to grow, this is something that can happen. And now we're sitting at, 1.6 million downloads and thousands of first-time homebuyers every year getting educated through
Time
this.
out, time out, time out, time out. 1.6 million downloads?
Yeah.
Man, pat yourself on the back. That's fantastic. And you started this when in 18?
2019. 18 was research. That's the other thing. I researched for a year before I started it. I continued doing real estate full-time, and on weekends I was figuring out how to become a podcaster.
If there's nobody listening to this, if just my team listens to this, speak to my team for a second. I got some team members that are like, I don't know. I don't like how I sound. I don't like my voice. I don't like how I look on social media. Talk. If there's no listeners right now, like my mom and a couple of my team members, speak to my team members right now and encourage them to get their voice out there, their face out there. What can they do to kind of break down that wall of, I don't like how I look. I don't like how I sound.
There's the happy medium between what you were talking about. I don't want to be famous either. Fame doesn't matter to me. Educating, helping, and lifting up the consumer, that matters to me.
Fame's a byproduct of the service you put out in the world.
Yes, exactly. And, to me, you're like the most famous relational business coach in the country. And that's, to me, you're famous. Now, would my kids think you're as cool as Taylor Swift and Dua Lipa? Probably not, but I do, and so it's kind of like, that thing when the student is ready, the teacher will appear.
Absolutely.
If they put it out there, somebody in their database is going to go, that's exactly what I need right now. But if you don't put it out there, don't worry about the packaging. I mean, I am the biggest dad joke cringy nerd on my podcast. But if you listen to the next sentence, I'm going to hit you with facts and data and real information that's going to help you progress so you have a financially stable life. And so the packaging, I think, is get your team out there, get them to do their thing. Find out what it is. Find whatever it is. If you're good at hanging out, then have Monday night football parties and invite your clients. Awesome. If you're good at writing, blog.
Yeah. If you're good with the elderly, show up and, bring some dinner and have dinner around 4:30 at night or whatever. Understand who your tribe is, right? I'm hearing that theme from you. Understand who your tribe is. And if you're Uncle David to people and it's like you can speak their language, then go do more of that. Okay. So I kind of have a peek behind the curtain a little bit. So tell the listeners a little bit about this unicorn network you've built.
Well, one of the things that I noticed, and again, this gets big picture, macro business wise, when you're looking at the way an industry works, you not only have to realize how your team works, but how other teams work and how other larger entities work. In our world, we have brokers, but then we also have individual teams within the brokers. And understanding how each of those work can help you determine how you want to build your business, where you want to put your own fundamentals, what you want to spend your time improving, and where you want to grow. Understanding that differentiation is the key in business. What are you going to be that's different from somebody else? Everything in real estate is based on numbers. So the broker is constantly recruiting, get me more people, more realtors, more realtors, more realtors. the real estate company with the most amount of realtors. That's what they, slap on all their marketing. We have, the best realtors and the most realtors. I decided to go kind of elite, go way down and just take the best of the best of the best. And like if I was that guy from Hoosiers, I instead of having the team, I'd have 5 Jimmy Chitwoods. And so,
That's good, by the way.
and I realized right away that you could, because there are 1.3 million realtors. 47% of them didn't sell a home last year, and 87% of realtors quit in 5 years.
What industry does that? Like how many industries are there? Like CPAs, like 50% of CPAs don't do any tax returns. Are you what?
Yeah, bro. Sorry, I called you bro. That's my Southern California in me.
It's all good.
That lets you know when you've really hit me in my heart.
I got you.
It's like I could go on for hours about it, but the key was I found a hole in the industry, and the industry is a big boat that's not going to turn around. But what I can do is, instead of building a business the way everybody else does, where you get as many people as you can and then you play the numbers game. That's why I started the podcast, because it bothered me that they were doing the numbers game with the consumer. Here, go work with this person I'm hoping works out. And there's an 87% chance when you want to sell your home in 5 years, they're going to be back at their old job. That's disgraceful. And that's not right.
And
So
when you're saying the numbers, though, like just be very pragmatic for a second. So first-time homebuyers typically have a lower average sales price, and so that's why a lot of realtors,
correct.
a lot of people in our industry, don't chase after them. But I would challenge that, and you're the expert on this. I mean, I feel like I'm an expert, but you're an expert from digging into the data. I believe in my 21 years experience, I found that first time homebuyers not only are like the beginning of the life cycle of all business, because they end up having families, they end up moving up, they ended up upsizing, their kids move out, and they end up downsizing. Like it's the most profitable long-term client we can have as first-time buyers. And not only most profitable, I think it's the most referable type of clients. I think when you serve a first-time buyer, like this is what people don't know about real estate. In real estate, we don't just serve people who are getting married or people who got a promotion. The majority of, we call it the 3Ds: death, divorce, and delinquency. When somebody dies, they don't have a group of people around them that everybody dies at the same time. When somebody goes through divorce, they don't have like a group of friends that are all going through divorce at the same time. That would be weird. But when you're a first time buyer, you're kind of hanging out, right? Like follows like. First time buyers hang out with each other, and then they bring all their friends. I like talked about like it's missed because of the low average sales price, but we should not be missing out on this demographic, because it's the most profitable and most long-term business model there absolutely is.
So I'll give you a real estate specific example that other business owners can figure out a way to do it in their business as well. When you help a first-time home buyer buy a home, everybody wants to give them a gift. Everyone wants to give them something. The simplest and easiest way for you to quadruple the money that you made with that first-time home buyer is to hold a housewarming party for that first-time home buyer. They will bring all their renter friends. And if they're snarky, spiteful people, they're really going to invent all their renter friends so they can rub their face in it. But I'm being goofy. But the fact and every business owner can find a way to do that. When you have someone buying, your daughter bought a car for the first time. I saw it on social media today. If you sell someone their first car, all of your correspondence back to them should be about what an amazing accomplishment this was and how incredible it was. And then they tell all their friends who are petrified because they've heard the horror stories of going to a car dealership and getting grinded. And so figuring out that there's a referral source, and I laugh in real estate. People work like crazy. I'm going to be the best. I'm going to be the best. I'm going to be the best. And then they go sell the home of Sally, who's been living there for 35 years, and Sally leaves and she downsizes to Florida. Whereas, and great, you made triple the commission, but if you gave Blue Star A ribbon service, oh, that was opposite. Blue ribbon A plus gold star. How about that? If you gave that service to a first-time home buyer, I mean, the joy that they're going to have bringing people over to their home instead of cramped sitting in an apartment when they want to watch the Super Bowl, when they want to get together for Thanksgiving or the holidays or Friendsgiving,
Mm,
just the opportunities to realize that you sell your product to multiple different niches. Some niches are in that season of life, like you talked about. It's not everyone
absolutely.
gets divorced and dies at the same time, but boy, everyone does a lot of these things, and all their friends ask them about it. And if you don't believe me, go to Reddit.
Yep.
This whole world talks to each other about how did you do this? How did you do that?
Yeah. And at the end of the day, the bottom line is it's still referral, it's still introduction. Like they're happening, but they're happening in a different vehicle. Real quick before we get into winning at the game of life and what that means for you and where you're going to take this podcast, I want the listener to hear this. So David Sidoni's passionate about first time home buyers, if you can't tell. All right. Created How to Buy a Home podcast. You need to go listen to it. Even if you don't want to buy a home today, you need to go listen to this podcast because you're going to understand the housing market by listening to this podcast. It's really good. I was actually walking my dog, listening to multiple episodes of yours, and I'm like, man, this is really good. I could actually turn this into a team meeting. Like I'm gonna like there's so many different ways to unpack your information. I'm going to say this, and I don't know, I'm sure you've thought about this, and I'm sure people have told you this, but if they haven't, and I'm the first one, sorry about that, because people need to tell you this. As a realtor, a really, really good realtor might sell 20 homes in a year, might sell 30 homes in a year. Really good,
Correct.
right? Really good realtor. If you're in an industry that you're passionate about and you want to pivot into a podcast because you really care about helping people, in real estate, we can get paid referral fees. We can introduce somebody to my friend in Orange County, my friend in Denver, Colorado, in Florida, in North Carolina, and we can get paid a referral fee. There's things that you need to look at as a business owner. Where is there revenue to be made from that aligns with my core values, that aligns with the service and the passion that I want to instill into the marketplace? Make this up. If David's crushing it and he's selling 20, 30 homes in Orange County, doing great, has buyer's agents, let me give you some numbers. In 2022, there were 213 people that listened to his podcast that ended up buying a home. In 2023, 224 people who had closed on a home, bought their first home because of David's podcast. The amount of people that he is impacting is surpassing the amount of people he can impact in his backyard. Think about that. Think about that. If you're a landscaper or you're a CPA and you're impacting your client base that's in your backyard and you start a podcast because you want to help people with some problem or some challenge, to the scale in which you can do that is unbelievable. And you told me, correct me if I'm wrong, you told me there's about 1,200 people in your pipeline that have reached out because you're providing the solution to the problem that they're going through and they want to be connected to these unicorn realtors all over the country. And it's because of the work you're doing. Is that correct?
Yeah. And what's interesting with the numbers that you gave, those are the ones that became part of my business. Those are the ones that stayed with the unicorns. It's double that for people who bought a home. And
Mm,
I understood at the very beginning of my business model, there were going to be a lot of people that were going to take my education for free. But
mhm,
again, I'm a business nerd and I went and looked at it and thought, okay, this year we're 32% of every single purchase is a first time home buyer. That's about 1.2 million people when we hit our 4 million units at the end of the year. 1.2 million people, fine. I don't care if 225 people go through the services that I offer and another 300 or 400 just use me for education. The numbers are still going to work out. And that's why I have 1,200 people that I'm talking to. But that also gets deeper into the fact that one of the things I'm focusing on is the education point, and that's helping people a year before they're even shopping for a home. And that's a whole different part of, you know, you can use a podcast, especially if you have a little bit of passion, like you mentioned, a landscaper. If there's some kind of passion for the career path that you've chosen, you can take the passion part and put that into a podcast that has education and a niche of people you will find. Some of them will listen just to listen and never reach out to you, but some of them will then eventually look for your area of expertise in whatever that niche is.
You've blessed us, and I want to figure out how we can bless you here for a second. So I want to talk about winning at the game of life, but I want to We won't go into detail because I want people to listen to your podcast, but here are some things that David shares on his podcast. I believe, and I've heard this from the great coach, Kristen Tabbert, talking about the problem is
Yes.
usually not the problem. It's how we think about the problem, right? That's how we think about it. Most people think the problem is the high interest rates right now. I was with my 12-year-old son last night, and I know you talk about this stuff on the podcast. And if somebody wants to know more about this, they can listen to my next episode, or they can. What I would hope is they listen to How to Buy a Home. But I was talking to my son about investment real estate, and we went through some scenarios. He's 12, okay, so we were talking about how to buy like a $200,000 rental property in our backyard, and what that looks like. And I said, okay, if you're putting 20% down, this is how much you have to put down, and if it grows this much, here's the thing. Make up numbers, right? If you buy a $200,000 house and you put 10% down, that's $20,000, and it goes up to 240. What percent of return did you make? No, I know what you're thinking. You're calculating 200 to 240, right? But the cash that you invested was $20,000. You've
Yeah.
now doubled your money. That's a 200% rate of return. Buyers, listen to me. It's not the rate, it's not the payment, it's the investment overall. And David's podcast will teach you how to be a confident home buyer. Please go listen to the podcast. David, winning at the game of life. What does winning at the game of life look like for you? We believe on our podcast, relationships win. And in the game of life, relationships win. What does winning look like for you?
Okay, this is where I'm supposed to give you a really philosophical, well thought out answer. And I decided that to really understand myself and be real. And I'm just thinking this right now. I didn't think about this ahead of time. I was sitting here going, oh, I'm supposed to say something like, you know, really effective. No, here's what winning the game of life is for me. I've discovered this in my third act and I love it. And I love helping people. So I don't know, is where I'm making enough money that I can do a live stream 2 or 3 times a week and be a guru that answers questions like Clark Howard, who used to be on CNN, or Dave Ramsey, or, the people that just people respect. And then I live in New York City and I go see a Broadway show every night. That is winning at the game of life. The real, like, who I am to my core is I almost feel like I'm up by 20 in the fourth quarter right now
Mm,
because this happened. I I haven't won the game yet, but dang, I get to wake up every day and help and motivate people. 10 years ago I wasn't here, but I'm here
yeah,
now. Help and educate people who frankly are being ignored or steered wrong, and that feels pretty darn good. And if I continue to do it in this way, there's little parts of it like, boy, I'd like to really understand how to be a better CEO, and I'd like to really understand, what my hiring process is going to be over the next 5 years so that I can continue to do. But then when I say that, I realize all those things are so that I can just live in a position of waking up where some people want to hear the advice and I can come and answer people's questions and help them move forward.
that's awesome. You're doing it, and I love it that you're doing it. In the game of life, relationships win. And my kids today are like, Dad, send this man his flowers, send this woman her flowers, which is just accolades and appreciation. Who's somebody in your life that you want to thank? Who's somebody you want to send some virtual flowers to that got you here today? Maybe somebody who's helping you right now, maybe somebody in your past that got you to where you are.
It's interesting because people ask me this all the time. I've had so many different mentors. The original founder of the high school of the arts that I went to is a guy named Dr. Ralph Opasek, who basically turned my life in a complete direction, much to the chagrin of my soccer coach. And all the directors and wonderful people I've worked with. 2006, when I went to a Buffini event and I met my coach at an event, wasn't even a member yet. The first 5 or 6 years of my business career, having a coach from day one, she's affected everything I've ever done. Her name's Nancy Arroyo Villa. She's since left the company to go do something else, but she understanding what a business, I learned everything about the business, but then I also understood what a business coach can be. And when you're coming from a place of athletics and performing and you have coaches and directors, it was a new world for me. And she absolutely is 100% the reason why I am where I am today.
That's awesome. Great answer, by the way. If you're a high school athlete, what I heard, David, I heard you say, if you're a high school athlete and it's like, I'm a track star, I'm going to run at Oregon. And you know what? Sometimes life throws you something that you just got to pay attention to, and it's okay to pivot. And the way you've pivoted to get you where you are today is, you mentioned it, you are winning at the game of life. And that's awesome. And my next question is, how can the listener support you? But I think I know, because you've answered this a lot on your own podcast, is number one, go listen to How to Buy a Home podcast. Number two, go leave a review. It's fantastic. Go leave a review, because that's what keeps things going. That's what keeps it ad free. I'd appreciate if you listen to it, especially if you're in my backyard. Listen to David, because when you're ready to buy a home, you're going to win. If you're buying a home with us,
Yeah.
you're going to win. We've actually helped some of the listeners on David's show. It helped connect us a little bit. And so I know how the listeners can help you. How the listeners can help me is, if you like this episode, screenshot it, tag me on social media. And if I see some of those out there, I know that you like this content, and I'll make more of it, and I'll bring David back on and we can talk more about how to buy a home. Today, we're talking about how to have a podcast, but anything else that the listeners can help you with, David?
We had a hack on my YouTube channel. So check out the YouTube channel, How to Buy a Home. It's coming. It's going to be coming out when this podcast hits the air. We're going to be starting again, but howtobuyahome.com is everything you need. And I will give you a reciprocal plug and throw you some flowers, knowing that we were going to have this opportunity to talk. And as you know, I do that mobile university in the car. I've been listening to your podcast, and I am learning tons from people from all different walks of life. And I appreciate so much what you're doing. Thanks, Brad.
Oh, thanks so much, David. I appreciate it. I just, like I said, I grew up in the locker room.
Yep.
I didn't go to business school, but I got a master's degree in business from the locker room. And it just taught me a valuable lesson. It taught me you can learn from people all the time. You can learn from people like David. If you have a business right now, you might not be at the level of doing a podcast, but you can learn something. And that's the beauty of it. Stay curious, stay hungry, stay humble, and continue to grow. So, David, thanks for being a guest today. I appreciate it.
Thank you, sir.
All right. That's a wrap. Enjoy the episode. Share this with a friend. And if you don't mind, send us a screenshot, tag us on social media, and we'll make more of these. Have a great day. Thanks for listening to Student of the Game podcast. Whatever game you are playing, I'm cheering for you. See you in the next class.